Dr. Nay. How are
Hola,
you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you today?
Very well. Welcome to Project Parents United. I am so thrilled to have you on our platform.
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk. I always love sharing about love, parenting children, all the things that life's about.
Wonderful. And again, we are talking about such an interesting and important topic. We all know for parents who are going through the process of divorce, it is a life-changing process. And it gets even more complicated when there are children involved. And we
Yes,
don't talk about it's just the thing is we don't talk about this topic as much. And when I posted about this on my platform, we got a lot of questions from parents. So I really hope we can address some of their concerns with our conversation today.
yes. I'm sure we will be able to.
And again, I think it's only fair to begin the conversation with for parents who are going through this process. I mean, how do parents even begin the conversation of divorce or separation? I know, it obviously depends on the age of children involved, but do you have any examples of how this conversation can be initiated? Some age appropriate examples?
Sure, sure. And before we even dig deep into that, I want to also just give us a framework of
Hmm.
how I see the family,
Right,
because families are a system.
right.
And the thing is that parents, the way I look at it, are chief emotional officers.
Hmm. Right.
They're the
Yeah.
CEOs, but in a different way.
Hmm.
And for anybody who is getting divorced, let's take the stigma out of divorce because we're living longer.
Correct.
Didn't
Yeah.
know we were going to be alive, for 80
Right.
years, God willing. And so it is hard to stay married for a very long time. And in fact, the research shows 50% of people do get divorced. With
Mhm.
that being said, as a chief emotional officer, what you want to do is you want to elicit in your child a secure sense of self,
Hmm. Right. Hmm.
because everything's about attachment.
Correct. Yeah.
And so you want children to have self-worth, be able to handle their emotions, and have strong social connections.
Hmm.
And now divorce can be an adverse child experience,
Correct. Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be. Let's start with what the parent's stance should be. Whether you're talking to a 4 to 7 year old,
Hmm.
a 7 to 13 year old, or a teenager,
Right. Yeah.
the parent, the way that they communicate to the child about the divorce is going to set the tone,
Correct. Yep. Hmm.
right? So we would love to have both parents there. If both parents can't be there, I understand.
Hmm.
But whoever the parent is or parents are that start the conversation, no
Hmm.
matter what, they want to stay very calm within themselves so
Right.
that they can soothe the children.
Hmm.
So for any parent, we don't want you to get emotionally dysregulated in front of your children. Do it with your therapist, do it with your girlfriends. That's normal too. But
Correct.
the parent is the emotional regulator.
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's the framework. So if we get into the little guys, 4 to 7, because that's narrative memory begins at 4.
Right.
And I've done this with my own children and with plenty of my patients' children.
Hmm.
I usually read them stories about divorce.
Oh wow. Yeah.
There's tons of great movies on YouTube about divorce.
Hmm.
You can also have them draw,
Hmm.
like, what does it mean to be divorced? Like, what does your family look like?
Right. Yeah.
And get really curious about what's going on inside of them. How are
Hmm.
they feeling? What are they thinking? And they're really young,
Hmm.
those ages, so they might not know. So what I'll do sometimes, I'll get a big piece of paper,
Correct.
put
Yeah.
the child on it, and I outline them.
Right.
They love this. And then
Right.
I'll say, show me where you hurt.
Oh wow. Yeah.
They
Right.
love that, right? So it's using arts and crafts and all the different senses
Right.
to introduce this concept to them. 7 to 12-year-olds, their brains are more abstract. And
Correct.
again, you really want to think about what are they feeling
Hmm.
and give them
Right.
so much space to express their feelings.
You bring up a really important topic. There is still a lot of stigma around divorce. And it's actually, I think it's more cultural. Certain cultures, you just don't want to talk about it. You just kind of like shove it
Sure.
under the rug. And
Sure.
children are the ones who bear the emotional brunt. So I
Yes.
guess with conversations like this, we open up the dialogue. We
Hmm.
help the parents. We kind of like help them find solace that there is still, you can seek help, and if we take the right steps, we can help children navigate this very difficult transition. So I love those concepts. And again, you made a really important point. For younger children, keep the information simple, I guess. And
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, like I think it's just about opening the dialogue, helping them open up the conversation, right?
Yes, and to not, if a child has a question about it, to
Right.
really be present with your child. I mean, that's the biggest
Correct.
gift, with cell phones and everything these days. And
Right.
thank God my kids weren't little with this whole cell phone thing, because
Right.
I don't know what would have happened. But we want to be present with them, especially when we're having deep conversations. And,
Absolutely.
and, and with teenagers, it's a little different because they're already individuating from the family.
Correct. Yeah.
They don't want to really be around you that often, which is totally normal.
Right.
So, I would almost collaborate with them because there's a collaborative part of the brain.
Hmm.
And as they're starting their own identity,
Hmm.
ask them, what do you feel about this? What do you think about this? How
Right.
can I help you manage this?
Right.
And whatever you do, though, still keep boundaries with them.
Correct.
Don't change your boundaries because you feel guilty.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I
No.
think, yep. And I think another concept that, or, question that comes up quite often is, parents are asking for older children. Sometimes children can think that they can fix all the problems, or
Mm.
sometimes they blame themselves for the divorce. Let's say you have this conversation with your preteen and older kid, and they kind of think they want to take the blame for the separation, that maybe it's them that caused it, or they feel like they can fix the situation. But if a parent is handling this particular scenario, what do you think is the right approach? How do we handle this?
That's really probably one of the most important questions because it's not just in divorce,
Hmm.
but anytime something negative is happening in the home that's not directly a result of
Right.
the
Yeah.
child will blame themselves.
Hmm.
And there's a reason why the child does this. Because think about it.
Hmm.
We need our parents to survive.
Correct.
We need them to thrive. We need them for everything. And so when the environment fails them or a divorce happens,
Right.
the child will want to think it's their fault because it gives the child hope.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and the child can't experience themselves as good in a bad situation.
Hmm. I see.
So there's a reason why children blame themselves. It's protective for them. So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
super important that you tell them it's not their fault, even if they don't bring it up.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Correct.
really, really, really important. 2 years old, that shame can develop. And this
Right.
is actually how shame does develop.
Oh, wow. Right.
Because the child thinks, oh, it has to be my fault. My mommy wouldn't yell at me for that. Even maybe the mom's having a bad day. I have a bad day.
Correct.
I
Yes.
have 5 kids. They're older, thank God. I wanted to pull my hair out of my head.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's reality. But if you say to
Absolutely.
the child, it's not your fault. It's really
Right.
not your fault.
Exactly. Yep. And also, like, I guess, in a very subtle way, as you mentioned, like giving them this message that it's an inevitable process. It's happening regardless, right? It's a very hard pill to swallow. So I guess talk to your child through this transition, you
Yes.
know? And one question that I wanted to ask is, so at what stage should a parent like bring up this conversation? When everything is final, or they're in the process of separation, they're just about contemplating it? Like, when do we start having this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, listen, children have antennas for everything that's going on in their home.
Hmm.
And if you're not explicit with them, they will make up probably scarier scenarios in their brain.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's just because we all have good imaginations.
Yeah.
And so I think the contemplative stage is very different.
Hmm.
But once people, file for separation, divorce, or are really at the cusp of it,
Correct.
I
Yeah.
think, depending upon, again, the age of the child, it is important to discuss things with them.
Okay. I
Because
see.
when we discuss things and we communicate, we take the sting out of them.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. And I agree. You're slowly prepping them. You don't have to tell them at the very beginning of the process. You just tell them as things are getting more concrete. And I
Yes.
think it just gives them enough time to kind of like process the information. It's a big shock, I guess.
Yes.
Right.
And the thing is that, in psychotherapy, when I work with my patients, and let's say if they had trauma, we don't discuss all the trauma at once, right? Because that would
Right.
overwhelm their nervous system. So there's
Right.
something called titrating the process, which
Right.
means, you can also take it off in bits and chunks and
Hmm.
at a time.
Correct. Yeah.
Everything doesn't have to be processed at once, because it can't be, because the child needs to really integrate what they're hearing.
Correct. Yep. Exactly. No one, I really, I love this. That's why we love to have experts on our platform, because we really get the perspective. It's like we get the hard hitting, right information. And I think parents will really benefit from this. Now, other question that comes up is, what if things are really bitter? It's really hard to not talk ill of the other parent. So if a child asks you for a reason for why the separation's happening, like, what do you do? How do you handle this situations? You're not, really talking ill of the other parent.
I mean, this is the way I look at it. You made a decision to marry this person. You made a decision to have children with this person.
Right.
And you owe the child decency in that.
Hmm.
And I understand that, especially maybe at the beginning of divorce, or maybe if there's been infidelity or
Correct.
financial loss or lying. And I understand that it can be really hard to zip your lip if you're angry at your spouse. But that's where you go to your therapist.
Hmm.
And I think if you can remind yourself that you're a parent first,
Correct.
and that it's not really like disparaging a parent's a child's other parent doesn't do the child any good.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? Unless the child is in real harm, and then they wouldn't even be going to the other parent's home. But I really have a very huge pet peeve about parents that weaponize their children.
Wow. Yep. Mm-hmm.
No matter how you feel about them. And, I can speak personally to that, because I grew up in Brooklyn with a single mother.
Right.
And my father was no charm.
Correct. Yeah.
She really was left with the brunt of parenting.
Correct. Yeah.
And she really made a point to not disparage my father.
That's amazing.
It was really great. It was such
Yeah.
a gift that she gave to me. And I'm sure it wasn't easy, but she did that. So it can be done. It can be done. And if you need help with it, get resources.
Right. Absolutely.
But I just don't find any excuse for that. That's just my own personal bias.
Right.
Not to say I haven't been guilty of it at times. Okay?
Yeah. Again, no, it's easier said than done. There's a lot of anger. Obviously, when you're separating ways, it's hard not to like let off some of that anger when you're talking about it with your children. But I think really hold your thoughts, because you have to think about it. There's two parents who love their child. I mean, the fact of the matter is that they're just not living in the same household, but that does not dilute the love that they have for their child.
The love that they have for their child, right? And
Absolutely.
and one other thing is that, like, if you don't like your husband, and then every time you look at your son or your daughter, you say, "Oh, you're just like your dad."
Oh my
Like, don't do that.
God.
That's a no-no.
Yeah, that comes quite a bit. So you bring up a really, really important point. And I think one thing that I would like to highlight that you also mentioned is there are scenarios where, obviously you have two parents, you're co-parenting, both are good, but if there is a situation of harm where you don't want any association with the parent, now that's a completely different.
That's completely different. Right.
So I'm glad that we clear that also in this conversation.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And one of the parents asked a very interesting question. So they said, what if you're criticized for your parenting style? Let's say you have children living, you're co-parenting, your child goes to the other parent's house, and you hear the negative criticism about your parenting style from your children. They are the bearer of this news. What do you do in this situation? Do you call the other parent and tell them, don't do that? I mean, how do you handle this?
I always say to my patients, listen, your husband or wife didn't listen to you when you were married. What makes you think they're going to listen to you when you're not married?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. And usually I would say one of the number one things that, even when I'm working with couples that are married, that they come to me to help them with is co-parenting together.
Wow. Yep.
So whether you're married or divorced.
Right.
And you can't really control what an ex is going to say about you.
Right.
And they probably will criticize, or they can criticize. And you can always just say, well, okay, that's the way daddy does it, and this is the way mommy does it. And you know what? You're going to benefit from both types.
Wow.
Hopefully it'll balance you out. You always want to, unless it's dire situations, the idea is to leave your children with hope and optimism.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not always easy. I have 2 of my own and 3 stepchildren.
Right.
I've raised since for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And parenting is the hardest job in the world.
Of course. Hard as it is, like you mentioned, when you're married, I mean, it's a different story when you are co-parenting. So that is tough.
Yeah. But if your ex, whatever, poo-poos your parenting.
Right.
All right.
Take it in the stride, just don't, again, like, I guess once you go down the road of like bashing, it just only gets worse. And what are we telling our children? One parent has to, I think, take the stand and take the lead on this and say to your children, as you mentioned, I think that's a really solid strategy. You're going to benefit from both the styles, right?
Yeah. And listen, I'm not perfect. I wouldn't expect my ex to be perfect. We're all people struggling on this journey.
Right.
So absolutely. I would hope that he would give me grace, and he did, and I gave him grace, and that helps.
Absolutely. No, I know. These are some really solid tips, and I love that. We hope you found this information useful, and don't forget to tell us what you think. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or visit us at www.projectparentsunited.com.